Hey everybody, me again, showing up at the start as one of the many things the algorithm requires of you now. PayPal, Patreon, YouTube Super buttons, everything's down below if you want to support me, only do so if you actually can. And let's go through the various pipelines bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. So, in terms of pipelines that bypass the Strait of Hormuz, for oil at least, there are a few that already exist. There are several that are almost complete, and there are many others that are about to start construction that are effectively done deals. They're locked in at this point because nobody in the region wants a repeat of this. But starting with the total numbers and what already exists, so normally the amount of oil exiting via the Strait of Hormuz, you've heard a bunch of different numbers, anywhere from 14 to 20 million barrels per day. The actual number is usually 16, sometimes 16 and a half. Now, up until the US blockade of Iran, about 2 million was still leaving from Iran, and Iran was letting about 1 million per day go in the form of oil tankers from Iraq. So that was about 3 million off of that deficit. But as soon as we blockaded their 2 million, they obviously reneged on allowing the 1 million from Iraq to leave. So that went back down to zero actually leaving the strait. However, a few pipelines already exist, one of which is the UAE's pipeline, which goes over to its Fujairah port or coast outside of the Persian Gulf. The other is Saudi Arabia's pipeline, which goes all the way over to a port on the Red Sea, both of which were already usually pumping about 500,000 barrels per day each out in each direction. So those 500,000 each were already not part of the 16 million that normally leave through the Strait of Hormuz. But in terms of the actual bypassing oil now, the UAE is getting an extra 1 million barrel per day out through their pipeline. So that brings the deficit thus down to 15. And Saudi Arabia is getting an extra 4.5 out through their pipeline, which thusly brings the deficit down to 11.5. And then, in terms of the most immediately about to activate diversions, there are two pipelines in Iraq, one from the Kurdistan region that is doing about 300,000 barrels per day now, and one from the central Iraq region, both of which run up through Turkey, which combined, when the second one activates in a few weeks and gets up to full capacity around August or September, will be doing a combined total of about 1 million that will be circumventing the strait. And of course, anywhere between now and then, if the US stops blockading Iran, then that's another 2 million of exports that suddenly comes back on the table. But for the sake of the math, we're just going to assume that that doesn't happen, no matter how far into the future we go. There is a second UAE pipeline that they've been working on that will be ready early next year in the beginning portion of 2027 that will allow them to get about another million out circumventing the strait. Once the next UAE pipeline starts up next year and adds another million of diversion on, that will bring the deficit down to 8.5. If the whole situation is still ongoing, that is. And then sometime after that, next year, around the middle, maybe a bit later, a pipeline going from Iraq through Syria over to the Mediterranean coast will be finished. And that one will add about another 500,000 or 500,000 barrels per day that can circumvent the strait, which would bring the deficit down to 8. Saudi Arabia is finalizing the engineering plans for a second pipeline that will go to the Red Sea as well, that will allow them to get the remaining portion of their exports that the first pipeline and terminal can't handle out there. And they're expanding the terminal so it will be able to export it once that pipeline is built. That one will not be finished until sometime in 2028. And the Kuwaiti tie-in to that one will be probably finished either late 2028 or sometime in 2029, as Kuwait, who normally exports about 2 million barrels per day, is kind of in the badlands of options. So an extension is now part of the plans to be built from Kuwait. So once the second Saudi pipeline is finished, that will be another 2 million. That would bring the deficit down to 6. And then the Kuwaiti tie-in after that would then bring the deficit down to 4, because that would be the extra 2 million from Kuwait being able to make it out. And then further down the line, at the very end of the decade, we will have the Qatari tie-in pipeline running from Qatar over across the Persian Gulf seafloor into the UAE system that they're in the engineering discussions of now. and we'll get the 1 million from Qatar over to the UAE, and we'll enable that oil to also circumvent the Gulf if necessary. And then the final one to be finished probably in 2029, or maybe not until right at the start of 2030, the Iraq to Jordan pipeline that will have a 2 million barrel per day capacity and will allow 2 million barrels per day of Iraqi oil to go down through Jordan to the port of Aqaba on the Red Sea. All right, that's it for this one. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around and listening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already. PayPal, Patreon, YouTube, super buttons, everything's down there if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. There's a link in the description to a drive folder full of all kinds of oil, energy, mining, etc. graphs that's free to access at any time. There's a link in the top and comment to my cat's YouTube channel. May God bless and protect all of you, and I will see you all around next time.